Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the possibly anticipated return of Chess Books Recaptured. We are here to discuss a classic chess book, one that I had long needed to read, and we have the perfect person to discuss it with, who I will introduce in a moment. First, wanted to give thanks, as always, to our sponsors, Chessable.com. The book we're going to discuss today probably won't help your chess game, but if you do want to work on your chess game, you guys should know by now that Chessable is the place to go, with a huge library of opening courses, middle games, end games, tactics, whatever it may be. And if you sign up for Chessable Pro, please use the link in the description to show them that you came from the Perpetual Chess Pod. So this week's or this month's or this year's book recap is to discuss a classic Dutch book which has been brought to the English language in recent decades. And it was probably first on my list of books that I felt like I should have read and had not read. So this is the perfect forum to do it. And here to discuss it is someone who has a personal history with the author and with the book. He is an accomplished journalist, an author, and commentator. He has been with the New in Chess magazine since 1985 and is now often hosting the New in Chess podcast, which is a welcome addition to the podcast offerings. I've been loving listening to it, and I'm pleased to welcome back to the program Dirk Jan ten Geuzendam. Welcome, Dirk.
Thank you, Ben.
Dirk Jan, sorry.
Well, thank you, Ben. Great to be back.
Yeah, this has been a long time in the offing because I know that you know this book very well, and it's a long book, so it's taken me a while to get through it. But it's an interesting book. I mean, it's not for everyone, I'll say right off the bat, but it is considered a classic for a reason, and the highs are very high. Dirk Jan, what is your personal history with The King Chess Pieces by Jan Hein Donner?
Well, the King is a collection of the best articles written by Hein Donner, who was a Dutch grandmaster, Dutch champion, and a very good writer. So the best pieces, they were collected in a Dutch edition called De Koning, which translates to the King. And immediately when it appeared in 87, it became some sort of a classic in the Dutch literatures. It's chess literature. There's so many quotes from the book that many chess players will know. And it's because he's such an extraordinary person. He's not your everyday grandmaster, not your everyday writer, not your everyday person. And that definitely plays a role. I never really met Donner because he was, well, before my time, clearly before my time. Actually, there were two brief meetings. One when I was maybe 15 years old, and he was giving a simul somewhere, and I asked him for an autograph. And I remember he was sitting there, he was reading a German magazine, and I asked him, could I have an autograph? And he says, of course, boy. And he signed it. And then later, maybe 1 year later, I played in a simul against him. And it just shows slightly how many people thought about him, or maybe how I thought about him. That the day before I had played in a simul against Vlastimil Hort, and I made a draw. And then I thought, okay, how difficult can this be? I'm going to beat this guy. And I was smashed in 25 moves, because of course he was a very good player. But there was this, let's say, his reputation as a player was a bit mixed. He had these really good results. I mean, he won the Hoogovens tournament, which is the predecessor of the Tata Steel tournament. He won that, I think, 3 times. He won a very strong tournament ahead of Petrosyan in Venice. He was Dutch champion. But at the same time, his failures, they were also legendary. He could fail like no one else. So it's probably difficult to find someone whose favorite chess player is Donner in the Netherlands. I mean, we had Euwe, the world champion, the giant, and then later there was Jan Timman. And well, the interesting thing is that for Donner, they were some sort of touchstones. I mean, Euwe was the grand maître. he always addressed him like that, really, the grand maître. And he very much admired Jan Timman's talent and wrote about him a lot. But in between, it was Donner who was the main Dutch grandmaster, but probably the least known abroad.
A lot to follow up on there, Dirk Jan. Number one, do you still have the autograph?
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And one thing that comes across in watching little snippets of him online and just sort of reading about his legacy, he comes across as a really larger than life figure. I mean, he's something like 6'6", as we say in the United States, heavy set man, smoker, drinker. Like, he just comes across as this like huge presence. Did you feel that as a 15-year-old?
Yes, but mainly because he was older. I think he was as we say, 1.87 m. So he was he was a tall guy, and he always looked a bit sloppy.
Right.
And the funny thing is, he was this really big guy, but his voice was rather high pitched almost. And what I found remarkable when I discovered his handwriting is very small, very precise and very small, which is also something that you wouldn't expect from such a big guy. And maybe it had this double effect when he got a stroke, and he was. Well, suddenly he was in a wheelchair, and this was actually the third time that I saw him. That was when the King was presented to him in 1987, and he came to the Museum of Modern Art in Amsterdam. There was an official presentation there, and he was this big man in a wheelchair, and there was a speech by his good friend Harry Mulisch, who was a Dutch novelist, who later wrote a book about their friendship that we can speak about. And he had this speech, and he said, the gods, they threw a slab of marble at you, and they got you, but they didn't get you to your knees. I mean, because when he, after this stroke, he continued to write, but he had to type with one finger. So the pieces that he wrote for a Dutch newspaper, they were very small, but they were very precise, and he even got a literary prize for that. But it was remarkable to see this big man, and all his pieces, they were written with a flourish, that suddenly he was reduced to the wheelchair and these very brief articles.
Yeah, and one nice thing about the book is that the articles, which is a selection, it's not like his complete oeuvre, but it's presented chronologically. So you can watch chess history progress, but you can also watch him age, and you can feel the humanity as he grapples with his mortality in the later years. There's some memorable quotes that I'll share about that later. Just to shed a little more light both about the book and about Donner himself. So as Dirk Jan said, collection of essays, it's 162 columns, so it's a long read. It's great bedside reading. There's very little there's some chess in it, but it's probably like 20-25%.
Yeah.
Do you have something to add?
Well, maybe we should say something about the English edition, because it's also connected to the history of New in chess. The idea to have an English translation came from Allard Hoogland. And Allard Hoogland was the previous owner and publisher of New in Chess. In the early 90s, he was a successful businessman, and he sold his company. And one of the things he wanted to do was to pay tribute to Donner. I mean, he was a chess fan. So what he decided for himself was that and I think he describes how this decision was taken during the candidates match between Nigel Short and Jan Timman in Spain, in El Escorial in 93. And he was there with a couple of journalists and friends at the grave of Franco that they went to visit. And there he took this decision to have a translation. He took a decision to organize 3 tournaments in honor of Donner, the Donner Memorials, which were held in Amsterdam in 94, 95, 96. And then he had a further Donner project, which was that he wanted there to be a television documentary on Donner, which was made and shown on Dutch television, which he financed. He wanted there to be a biography of Donner, which was written by his good friend Alexander Munninghoff, who also wrote a biography of Max Euwe. And then the third part was the translation of The King. And that was one of the first projects that we worked on together. He said, well, we're going to make a dream book, because first we made a selection from the selection. I think we left out 29 articles because, well, for some reason we thought that was better. Later, there was a paperback edition which has all the pieces. I mean, the other pieces were translated as well. But then we were just toying with this project like 2 small boys. Like, what would be the best paper? How many reading ribbons are we going to have? Who is the best book designer in the Netherlands? And so the book became, but he was sponsoring this. The book, when it came out, I think it came out in 700 copies, the original version, in a luxury edition, which was expensive, but I think we still sold it for half the price that it should cost. So
yeah, I came across the renowned reviewer Taylor Kingston wrote 2 reviews of The King. One when that edition to which you refer came out, and he said it was like $60, which this is 25 years ago. So even probably more like 100 or something now. Yeah. And then an updated one, and he was quite positive about it. And of course, the Munninghoff biography that you refer to was also subsequently translated and published by New and Chess. We should be clear, though, that that's not the book we're primarily here to discuss, only because I haven't read it. So, although I did read some highlights, and I read the interview that you did with the aforementioned novelist, legendary Dutch novelist, so Mulisch. So look forward to getting into that. But we'll be primarily discussing The King. I did want to share one other biographical note about Donner, because that I came across in browsing the Munninghoff biography of Donner, just because it's such a fascinating figure, especially looking from the outside in, as I am, compared to yourself. But, he came from sort of a very accomplished family. His father was a government minister, and I get the sort of impression that he was kind of this like chess-obsessed sort of black sheep who went on to live this sort of bohemian lifestyle. Munninghoff wrote that he found his unconventional lifestyle refreshing. He says he mostly didn't get up until 3:00 in the afternoon. He never opened any letters, which led to problems with the tax authorities that he would ignore. And he personally torpedoed his job at IBM by sleeping on his desk, lying on his back. So very much someone who lived life on his own terms.
That was an impressive moment, because probably he got this job at IBM through Max Euwe. He had probably so that he thought he was going to help him, but then I think it lasted half a year, and at some point he didn't turn up for work, and they called him and they said, "Where are you?" And he says, "Well, it's great weather and the sun is shining." And then they said, "Yes, but is that a reason not to be at work?" He says, "Well, if we all would do that, then probably the sun would stop shining." And that was the end of the discussion. And he never turned up for work anymore. So that was not for him.
Yeah, and he was married 3 times, and he alluded to in one of his essays having a rich wife. So I think that helped him be able to neglect responsibilities like work. Do you know Dirk Jan in terms of his personal life? Like, if only one of his wives was rich, but was he like financially independent from throughout his life?
Well, I think he was married twice, and the first time it was pretty complicated, because she was a member of the Provo movement in the Netherlands, which also got her into trouble, and I'm not entirely sure if he agreed with her views, but at some point she was arrested by the police and thrown into jail, and he was very angry about that, and he went there to get her out of jail, and then he had a public declaration that he was never going to play for the Dutch team again. I mean, there was a lot of drama there. Then the second wife, I have to think if maybe she was a lawyer. I'm not entirely sure, but she had a job which probably helped. So I don't know to what extent he got money from his family. I don't know.
Okay, but I mean, also he had this long-running column, and chess players,
yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they were reasonably supported in the Netherlands in those days for someone of yes. his accomplishment.
Yeah. I think with all the writing that he did and with her job, that they should have been fine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I suppose we should get a little more into the book. One thing that we'll return to later, but I just want to say, like, as early in the podcast as possible, is that some of Donner's views, I can't tell to what extent they're retrograde or to what extent they're sarcastic.
Yeah,
but he has extremely antiquated views about the role, or extremely sarcastic views about the women and about women in chess.
Yeah.
It's difficult to read at times. But that's my primary criticism. I mean, he also has outdated and like famously outdated views about the roles that computers would play in chess and such, that I don't find offensive. I find it amusing, but it's also like that was written in 1981. So it's somewhat understandable if you think back to the way that chess computers used to play in those early days. But so we'll return to those topics, but I just want listeners to not run out and buy it. And if you're sensitive to things that are now offensive, that were offensive then, but not as much.
Yeah. Well, probably he would have loved this. I mean, the way you are warning against him, and that that somebody might be offended, because it is clear that he was someone who liked to provoke, a real provocateur, and I think it's the difficult thing with him is to fully understand where the seriousness ended and where it became provocation or satire. Probably these days people are much more sensitive to this, and I can easily see people getting upset. At the time, it was much less so. Also because we more or less expected him to be like this, and I think in his case, you had to know him personally to fully understand how exactly he thought about these matters. But let's say the moment he was writing about women, and he had this theory that in fact women had never produced anything worthwhile in art or then I don't think that's what he fully thought. But he, and I don't know what exactly he wanted to say with it. But it was generally seen as funny, and it definitely was seen as funny by his wife, because at some point she. I think she's written a couple of articles about that. There was one article where she addressed all the complaints that people had, and then at the end, and she said, "Well, I really don't mind because it always makes me laugh so much." And I think, and there's another article which I happen to have here, and I don't know where it was published, but it's. But the title says a lot about what the tone was and what it was about, because it's called "The Professional Chess Player as a Contribution to the Emancipation of Women." So that definitely was not harsh criticism of what he thought. I mean, she also ridiculed him Well, as you say, he was sleeping late, and she just turned around all these things and saying, well, actually that's very practical, because if you have a child at home, then he can look after the child, and so it's there was a lot of fun there as well. So if you just purely take it at face value and think, okay, this is what he thought, women cannot play chess, I think that's too simple.
Okay. Yeah, I sort of had that impression, but still, it's jarring. It's jarring when you read it. Here in 2024. One other thing to note for listeners: the book is available, of course, in book form. It's also on Kindle and New in Chess Reader. As I often do for these projects, read it on Kindle. There's a lot there. There's a lot you'll want to highlight, whether you agree with it or not. Yeah. But on the other hand, as I said, it's also it seems like it would be a nice physical book to have on your bedside. And for the New in Chess Reader, there is some chess. Like there's enough where it would have been nice for me to play through the moves, but
he has many, well, I think brilliant descriptions of chess feelings, of chess thoughts, of in general, he writes very beautifully about chess and about the joys and the pain of chess. He's a very accomplished writer, and I think what I also might say is that when the book came out, the English translation, that I recommended it to many young players, and I was impressed by the number of people who really embraced it. Someone like Peter Svidler, he said, this is one of the greatest books I've ever read, and that was not for nothing, of course.
Jan Gustafsson, who I know you've worked with a bit, I've interviewed him 4 or 5 times and friendly with him, and I can never get a book recommendation out of him. And sarcastic as Jan is, it's hard to tell like where the truth ends, and the sarcasm begins. But the one book recommendation I did get out of him in all of our interviews was the King. Yeah. So that's actually part of the reason it's always been sort of so high on my list.
And I think he was serious about that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And as you say, I mean, that's one thing that to me is unequivocal, whether you agree with his views or not. He is an incredible writer. And when you set aside, like, as you say, there's a lot of political discussion there, art seep in, what role does chess play in the world? But when he's just writing about players, to me, is often when he's kind of at his strongest. And the fact that he was there, as Munninghoff says, he said, there's a quote somewhere in that book that says one of Donner's greatest strengths was that he was there. He witnessed these events. Yeah. So it's incredible to read. One thing I wanted to ask you before I share a few more likes and dislikes from this book is, so it mentions in the credits in New in Chess, the 2006 edition, Richard de Weger, sorry, I'm sure I'm saying that in terrible American fashion, is credited as the translator. So how did your work interface with his on this book?
Oh, well, he was Richard de Weger. He was the
Thank you.
He was he was a translator, and I think he's a brilliant translator. So I mean, my involvement in this book, let's say textual, there was zero. Okay. It was just we were looking for the right kind of paper, the reading ribbon, and the photo selection. So
and culling some essays when you said
yes.
Okay. Okay, glad to have that cleared up. Yeah. Okay, so without further ado, Dirk Jan, the main structure of this podcast, to the extent there is any, is I was going to share a few likes and dislikes from what I read, and then I would love to hear your reflections to the extent that you have any. So one of the things I really enjoyed, as I mentioned, was the real-time reporting. I mean, Fischer Spassky, 1972, he's giving a blow-by-blow. The 1975 potential rematch with Karpov that, of course, never happened. Karpov-Korchnoi in 1978. He was very, as I'll discuss in a second, he was also very insightful on sort of what might happen. So in some respects, like, the role of computers in chess. He was not good at predicting the future, but in terms of understanding personality traits and what behavior that might lead to, I don't want to spoil too much, but he was quite good at that. Any reflections on sort of his ability to, or what one can learn from reading through this chronology of his columns as chess history marches forward?
I think the articles that he wrote about 72 match between Fischer and Spassky and the other matches that you mentioned, well, they were his work for the newspaper. He did those from home. But the good thing was that he knew both Spassky and Fischer well. Actually, Fischer, when he was a young player, he liked to talk to Donner when he was around. Because he recognized that he was a special person. And with Spassky, he played at least one tournament in the Netherlands. So he knew these people. I think that was the main thing. And obviously he had general knowledge of the chess world and how things went. What I probably find more interesting from my perspective is the tournaments where he was himself and where he met people and he wrote about that. Of course, these reports on Reykjavik, they were high class journalism, but there was even more personal touch in the reports of tournaments where he played himself, and there he could become very. I mean, he would tell you about the bridge sessions that he had with other grandmasters, and you very much feel present at that tournament with all the other things that are going wrong on as well. It's not only the chess, but there's so much more, and he will tell you that he's playing. What is it? He's playing a game against Quinteros, and then he wants to drag on the game a bit because he knows that Quinteros he has a girlfriend waiting, or there's a girl that he's chasing, and he wants to finish the game as soon as possible, and those are nice details that he has a great eye for.
Yeah, for sure. Really takes you behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So the number two thing I highlighted, this is related to number one. Which was the portrait of Bobby Fischer in particular. I know that your Fischer file, who's written about him as a book about him that listeners should definitely check out. So again, you get to see his development. So in 1959, this is what Donner writes about Fischer. He writes, considering that he still managed to reach a shared fifth place, it must be clear what enormous possibilities lie dormant in this boy. If he outgrows the childhood diseases of his talent while retaining the core, a fabulous self-confidence combined with a clear insight, he will cause fear and dismay in the serried ranks of Soviet grandmasters. And as you say, they went on to become friendly. He talks about sort of witnessing a budding anti-Semitism in Fischer and saying that Fischer was reading a lot of Hitler biographies and seemed to be admiring him. And he tells a story of taking Fischer then to a World War II museum to show him the impact of murder, and he said that Fischer, at least temporarily, unfortunately, tempered his views for a bit after that. And then in 1972, just very insightful on Fischer's personality. So this is as the sort of back and forth is going on with will Fischer continue the match? He writes, there can be no other conclusion. Fischer is insane. Against my better judgment, I kept hoping he would listen to reason in the end, but my own prophecy was fulfilled. On July 31st, 1972, I said in an article in the Daily Detid, it doesn't take much insight into human nature to predict that Fischer will not be world champion for long. His quirks, moods, and whims will turn against him at the moment when he has reached the top. He'll hit out hard at nothing but thin air. And that's one of the more famous quotes in the book because it was so prescient.
Yeah. Well, I think that, all this says a lot about his talent. I mean, his intelligence and the brilliant way that he phrases it. So it's spot on. And he was one of the, few people who thought this and dared to write it. So in that sense, it's a clear demonstration of his, the quality of his writing and of his insight in people.
Yeah. And one more on that note, one more on Fischer. He wrote, one gets the impression that there is something specifically chessy in the rise and fall of the Fischer phenomenon. The game of chess has a great attraction for lonely minds, but its healing power is small. It engenders no viable expression and will only enhance inner rigidity. No one is as lonely as the world champion. From this point of view, Fischer was the Mr. Chess he always wanted to be. To us, who survive him, he only leaves perplexity.
Yeah,
and that, of course, was not when he died, but when he advocated his title.
Yeah, no, I think that is the great quality of the book, that there's so much of this beautiful writing, and I think that's why Donner is such a confusing person, that he has so much beautiful writing, and then occasionally in these mental explorations that he goes for, then he may end up in places where some of the readers will feel offended or they will feel upset, and I think you should. Yeah, my advice would be take it into the bargain and try to see the great quality of the writer as a whole, with his defects as well. But I think all the other things are so much more important.
Yeah, and on that note, this book, I came in with high expectations, of course, for all the reasons that we discussed. And I will say that it could just be sort of my own, like, not being a part of the Dutch chess culture or some ignorance of sort of like smaller details of chess history. But I did find it uneven at times. There were essays that I found less compelling than others because I may not have known enough about the principles. Yeah. And if that's happening to me, it's probably going to happen to some other people. But to me, the highs, the insights into the characters, and the the opportunity to hear his chess history described, and even when he's talking about politics and stuff, they were worth any suffering in sort of the head scratching moments that I encountered in the book.
Yeah, but I think that's well. For instance, if I return to Allard Hoogland, who wanted to build this monument for him, I think, let's say, in politics, I mean, probably they couldn't have differed more in opinion, but it wasn't for that. I mean, it was for all the qualities of Donner and the specialness that he wanted to build his tribute, and I think that's let's say, if you look at the pluses and the minuses, then there's the number of pluses is so much bigger. And it's true that let's say some of the tone, the irreverence was very, very much Netherlands in the 70s, 80s. It was very often that there was a real wish to provoke and to upset the, what do you say, the people in power, or the powers that be, that, and this wish to undermine all these values, or to criticize them, or to question them, you always run the risk that at some point you cross some lines. But and it's important to keep that in mind, that it was part of the mentality of the times as well.
That makes sense. And politically, he was pretty, like, borderline communist. Is that right? I mean,
well, yes and no, because he would also say that of course he didn't side with all the real communists. He was definitely opposed to that. But there, I don't think I'm in the position to give a true evaluation of what his political views were, and I think you could only. It's probably impossible to derive that from his writings. I mean, to get a complete picture, you should have known him, and it's what you very often realize, that when you meet certain people who are larger than life, then you really have to take a very close look at someone and to speak to them to fully understand what they really mean and how serious they are. In his case, I simply don't know him well enough. I mean, I've never had a personal conversation with him, so I'm very reluctant to draw any conclusions.
Yeah, and the king itself is not. It, you know, there's like a famous picture of him protesting the Vietnam War. Is that with Mulisch?
That's with Mulisch. Yeah.
But it's not, and it wades into politics. But it's more of a diversion than the main topic. By any means.
They both went to Cuba to support the Fidel Castro regime when they started, and it was something of those days that it was cool to go there, and they're often, let's say in Mulisch's case, he's been accused for many years that he never changed his mind or his opinion on Cuba, and people have said, okay, now you have seen what happened, what really happened there, and you should withdraw your statements and blah blah blah, and you never wanted to do that. So that was controversial. I think for me with Donner, what I find important is that there's so many people that that are important to me that have known him very well, and I can see the way they speak about him with affection, with admiration. In fact, that says more for me than trying to analyze his personality on the basis of what he wrote.
Okay, that's interesting, because one of the reviews I read was Richard James for British Chess News wrote a review of the Munninghoff Donner biography, and he hit on something that I had thought but had not crystallized. Which he said, Richard wrote that something he struggled with was he enjoyed the biography and he greatly enjoyed the king, but he at the same time got the impression that he wouldn't like Donner as a person because there's this bombast that comes across. Yeah. And that really resonated with me. I felt the same way. I felt like if I was around him, I would find him off-putting. But you're saying those who knew him well might beg to differ?
I think I have exactly the same feeling, Ben, that there's many things that I read about him that I think that's not the kind of behavior that I appreciate or whatever. But then there's people like Jan Timman or Genna Sezonko who really knew him well. And when they speak about him, it's always with affection and a very warm memory and just missing him, that he's no longer around, because they thought it was so wonderful when he was around.
Yeah, and he did die relatively young.
I think it was, he got this stroke when
61.
He was 57 when he got this stroke. So, but let's say, in fact, Genna Sezonko's and Jan Timman's appreciations for me, that means a lot. I mean, that gives me an idea. And I feel it's not for me to judge him, because and I could see when I went to interview Mulisch about Donner, and there again you saw this in fact his love for the man. I mean the times that they had spent together, the way they got along fine, or they got along great. So it's, but at the same time, there's, one of the things that struck me when I was thinking about this talk that we were going to have and what kind of person he was, then I was reminded of something. Tom Lehrer, the American, the singer, the comedian. But it's a long time ago. But I don't know when I discovered it. I think when I was a student. And he's hilarious. And at some point, he gives a short autobiography for his audience to tell them what kind of person he is. And of course, it's all nonsense what he's saying. But then he says he spent, I think, 7 years at Harvard, and he was trying, and he was part of an experiment there that he started himself, was to prolong adolescence beyond all previous limits. And that's what I also feel with a person like Donner.
That's a great line.
with Donner. Yeah. I mean, it's just this wish to prolong adolescence beyond all previous limits.
He basically prolonged it to convalescence. I mean, not quite death, but as you say, once he ended up in the nursing home, it seems like there might have been a minor reckoning. But other than that, I mean, he was living the good life.
and that experiment of this trying to prolong adolescence is combined with very serious observations and with very serious writing. But that is what makes it confusing, this mix, because it's both.
Yeah, yeah, well said. One other that I highlighted, I mean, obviously, as we've alluded to, he had some bones to pick. There's a lot of sort of arguments back and forth and trash talk, as we'll get to, but he was very big fan of Dr. Max Euwe and writes almost glowingly about him. I mean, the only sort of negative thing he says about him is that at some point he describes his chess as being sort of the living embodiment of the Peter principle, because he reached a level too high by becoming world champion. But even that was very poetic, I thought. But he writes, in reflecting on his legacy, he writes, "It's almost impossible to overstate his importance for chess life in the Netherlands. Before him, the game in this country stood at the same level as Belgium or in Ireland. Thanks to him, Holland has become a superpower in international chess. He reached the top in 3 capacities: as a player, as an organizer, and as a theoretician. His was a rich, full life, and he lived it intensely to the end." And as I've talked about on the podcast many times, I mean, certainly the legacy of Dutch chess lives on. I'm always struck by just how many prominent players and commentators, and you've got New in Chess there. It's quite impressive.
Well, that's all because of Euwe, and that's absolutely true. And of course, it was revived. Well, to a certain extent, it was continued by Donner and then revived by Jan Timman.
Okay, and the last that I highlighted, which we've discussed, but I want to share a few quotes, are his insights into human nature. Some of the more famous quotes include chess is a game of chance, which he returns to a few times. And doesn't explain in full, but it certainly resonated with me. What's your interpretation of that, Dirk Jan?
I think that's pretty much one-on-one. I mean, it just means what he says. That chance plays such an incredible role in chess, and maybe that's one of the advances in modern chess, that now that people work more with computers, that accuracy has grown. I mean, that's a feeling that I have myself, that players are more accurate in definitely in the opening part of the game. So their chance has become slightly less of a factor. But I think definitely every amateur player knows what an immense role chance plays.
Definitely resonated. I'll read a few more quotes. Insanity is an occupational hazard with chess players. That certainly comes across in his discussion of Fischer, and now we get to see it as we have accusations of online cheating flying all over the place here in 2024. He writes about Tal. He didn't get along with Tal, which I found surprising, because I've interviewed some people who got a chance to meet Tal, and they all speak glowingly of him, but there was some friction there. But in describing when Tal won the world, right before he won the world championship, similarly to how he was prescient with Fischer, he writes, "One thing, though, I will venture to predict: if Tal is to conquer the world title, he will not keep it for long. He is too much of a gambler. Tal may win the world championship, but he won't be able to keep it." And of course, Tal did encounter some health issues that may have contributed to losing it quickly, but nonetheless, it was striking to read that.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that he disliked him. It can be an objective assessment, which contains some truth. I don't know if he knew Tal personally. I have no idea, to be honest. Because as you say, it's very difficult to find people who have known Tal and do not speak very positively about him.
Yeah, he wrote somewhere about like when they were playing, he felt the contempt that Tal felt for him, or something along those lines.
Okay.
Yeah. And then as he starts to grapple with aging, as I mentioned, he writes very poetically as that starts to take place. So this is a quote from that era. He writes, "The big animals eat the smaller ones just as the smaller ones live off the big ones. If you wait long enough, everything will turn around in the end, because nothing is either this or that, but everything changes continuously, despite the fact that we don't often think of it. And that I am now the oldest grandmaster in Holland and Lodewijk the youngest is really a scream." Because he went from being the young star to, and I think towards the end there was like a 15-year gap between him and any other Dutch grandmaster.
But in those descriptions, and I mean there are even other descriptions where you feel it even much more. You feel his biblical background. I mean, he came from a very traditional religious family where people knew the Bible. And he wasn't a believer himself, but I guess that he knew the Bible. So many of those, the ways he expresses things, they were definitely influenced by that.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that for sure. I mean, obviously, even beyond the Bible, obviously just a very well-read person.
Yeah.
Okay, one more, and this is one of the more famous quotes from his later years, as you referred to, where he famously couldn't talk but was typing with one finger. He writes, "At the present, I'm at kind of a nursing home. I cannot walk at all, which is why I'm sitting in a wheelchair. My hands are very clumsy. I cannot write. But in 1984, someone at ergotherapy at Overtoom taught me how to type. With one finger, I can handle the machine pretty well. I have a column in NRC Handelsblad and will contribute to this magazine every month. My world has become very small now, but a chess player is used to that." So for dislikes, Dirk Jan, we already, I mean, the takes on women chess, as we've discussed, so I don't think we need to belabor it, but I did just want to share a few quotes just so that, again, so that listeners will know. So one is, "I have seen it coming and I feared the moment of final reckoning ever since the day I agreed to contribute to this women's magazine. However painful it may be, we must not shrink from the truth. Women cannot play chess." And there's 2 or 3 essays where he's kind of just railing on this topic. And again, we can't tell how serious he is, but it's really, it hits you like a sledgehammer. But then he has one where, as we alluded to, you can't tell, this is sort of possibly the payoff or possibly the reveal of him not being as serious as one might think. So I'll read this paragraph as well. "Why is it that women can't play chess? After more than 22 years of strictly scientific research, I think I may have found the answer. It is well known that women are superior to us men in every respect. They are physically stronger, and the everlasting battle of attrition between the sexes, their greater patience will always make them victorious. They can think logically, which is rare among men. Women have the better memory, as every man consorting with women will find out to his detriment time and time again. Women are more efficient and more purposeful. Women are more intelligent and understanding others. Then what is it that they are lacking? What causes all these magnificent qualities to disappear and become useless when they take their place at the chessboard? For 22 years I've been working on this, but the very first wrestlings of my theory go back much further, preceding early manhood, far back, almost to forgotten childhood years. Woman is superior to man in all things, but there is one thing she lacks: intuition." So I don't know. It's not unequivocally misogynist, but it's certainly, it is unequivocally misogynist at times, but that paragraph is very praising of women in some respects, but obviously not in terms of...
I think in many respects. You can also think of it as a mental exercise. He's thinking aloud and maybe investigating his own mind, what he really thinks about this, and he thinks, okay, they are so much better than men in so many respects, and this and that and that. He's trying to put a name on thoughts, and of course, he couldn't realize then that that these days these things are very that you have to be very careful with what you say.
Yeah.
So it's but it's I think from the reactions of the women around him at the time. I think that it's. I think that you're not supposed to say that you should see it in his time, but maybe it's a good idea to see it in his time anyway. I don't think there's any reason to think that he disliked women. I mean, on the contrary, he was surrounded by women, and I don't know. It's these things, because when you read it and the way you describe it is, let's say, this passage that you just read out. Actually, it's beautiful, and the only thing is that at the end it says, well, there's this one sentence, but women don't have intuition, which is not a fact. I mean, that's what his conclusion after 22 years of scientific, which of course is nonsense.
Yeah.
So it is the shock that you think, did you really think that? But all the rest is beautiful.
And there's a moment elsewhere in the book where he writes about how women are very good at games that are based on like physical interaction. He says that because chess is just sitting there brooding, women don't do as well. But he mentions games like bridge, where there's a more of a social component. He didn't mention poker, but I think you could put it in this category, which he says that women excel at. So it's not. He's not painting with like a singular brushstrokes, but
because many men, they might be totally offended by what he said about what all the women were better at. So it's to a certain, I think to a large extent it is play, and this is the kind of thing that he would do with Mulisch as well. That they were always playing with words, trying to outwit the other. I remember Mulisch, he told me, then he said, at some point I told Hein, we were having a discussion, and I said, you know the pinnacle of my fame would be if one day somebody walks into a lunatic asylum and says that he's Harry Mulisch. And then Donner thinks for a split second, and he says, yes, and that patient would be you. And so it's always this trying to be wittier than the other. For instance, that when we should also say that this article that he wrote about why women couldn't play chess was not published in a chess magazine. It was in a general glossy.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I mean, that probably triggered him even more to be more provocative. Right. And then there was a letter from a reader, and he said, this is really terrible. And Mr. Donner probably also thinks that black people cannot play chess.
Right.
And then he replied, no, this reader hasn't gotten it at all. Of course, black people can play chess, but black women cannot. I mean, so that's just witticisms. And but it's okay. It's something that these days we look at differently than at the time.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And my last dislike, and this one, it seems to be very revered, but for me, the petty squabbles, I didn't feel them as much. Like, for example, or probably most famously, he was rivals with Prins, who won the Dutch championship. And one of the most famous quotes in the book is him writing that Prins is the worst chess player in the world and cannot tell a bishop from a knight.
Yeah.
And when I read it, it's just kind of meaningless to me. I don't find it particularly funny.
Yeah.
It seems kind of petty. But I think maybe it's my own ignorance. Like, why is that whole squabble so famous?
I think, you have to keep in mind both the personalities. So he's this big guy who was who's insulting whoever he wants. And then there's Prince, and Prince is a difficult person. He's much more traditional. He's not part of that circle of, let's say, bohemian chess players. Let's say most of the Dutch chess players we know from that time, they were quite bohemian types, like Timman and Donner, of course. So he became Dutch champion, and this really annoyed Donner. That is clear. So he wanted to poke fun at that, and then you get this kind of attack, which initially was intended to be just a joke. And you always wonder how good is a joke if the subject of the joke, but the victim of the joke doesn't appreciate it really. I mean, I don't think Prince thought this was funny at all. Right. It just annoyed him terribly. So that's where you get into a difficult situation when one of them is joking and the other takes it seriously. I think everyone from that time knows this quote. And it's just become part of our language, of a chess language. I mean, if you want to say something negative about a person, he says, "Well, you can't tell a knight from a bishop."
Right.
Or the other way around. And but I understand that you think it's not terribly funny. I think initially it was terribly funny, but it wore thin at some point.
Yeah, and nowadays you could see it. Like if it were the current age, maybe like Ben Feingold actually recently did a video on Donner on his YouTube channel, and he was saying like Donner would have been perfect for Twitter because like he just liked to, as you said, provocateur who liked to stir the pot and trash talk people. So you could easily see it in like presented in some context like that. But yeah, I just considering all the sort of hype around it when I read it. And maybe it's because at the time it might not, with Prins being the Dutch champion, it might not have been perceived that way. But to me, given the legacy of Donner, when I read it now, it sort of feels like he's punching down. You know, it's like what it really was that they an important aspect of this is that they were in two completely different circles, and that played a big role. Suppose Prince had been part of that bohemian group of chess players, then it wouldn't have been funny at all. But now it became because it was. But here you really need the background information, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. And then he also had a squabble with Hans Rey, who he also trash talked. And by the way, he challenged Prins to a match, and Prins refused, didn't take the bait. Yeah. But he did play a match with Hans Rey, who beat him. Yeah. And then he was actually conciliatory and respectful after that. So he at least was capable of updating his views.
The way he took his loss, I think those sentences are beautiful. I mean, first he describes the total despair of how he had to cope with that loss, and then at some point, now life goes on. So, but in fact, that whole match, I mean, with the preliminaries, then the match itself, then the afterthought, it's just a very beautiful. How would you describe that? Well, it's almost poetic.
Yeah, I have a few quotes from it.
The good one is the day after he lost, and he wakes up, and you probably have it there. Yeah,
I actually don't have that one. I remember it, but leading up to the match, he writes, "The world title is not at stake in the match between Rey and me, but the level on which a game is played has nothing to do with the emotional anxiety it entails." And then after he loses, he writes, this is two separate lines. He writes, "In short, I sadly underestimated him. He plays a surprisingly intelligent kind of chess." And then he writes, "He plays the game at a grandmasterly level. He has a command of its many aspects. His judgment is sober and pessimistic. His tactical ability, excellent and aggressive. I didn't realize this beforehand, but I found it out to my cost. So very, very graceful loser in that
probably Hans. He had that framed and hung it over his bed.
Yeah,
no, but it's so nicely done.
Yeah,
but of course there was this friction. But in the end, by having this epilogue, you turn it into something beautiful.
Yeah. So those were my major reflections on the book. I think anyone who hasn't read it will be aware of both the good and the bad. But I certainly have that, despite not agreeing with everything and not knowing how much I would like him personally. I enjoyed the book much more than not. So definitely glad to have that gap in my chess knowledge plugged.
Yeah. Well, let's say. I'm not sure if I would like him personally, but I definitely would find him fascinating, and I do find him fascinating, and he's absolutely a major force in Dutch chess life, and I also think in international chess life that it's not every day that people like this appear and entertain us and. As I said, there's so much beauty in his writing as well.
Yeah, for sure. So anything else on the book, Dirk Jan, before we catch up a little bit? I know you've been to the candidates and you're working on editing a few things.
No, I think, no, it's a wonderful book, and I would recommend it, anyone to give it a try, and form your own opinion from there. Yeah, just have a look at this remarkable person and the thoughts that he shares. There's also many. Well, even if you don't agree with everything, there's definitely a lot that is of interest.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And so we're recording this on May 29th. Dirk Jan, you're heading to Norway Chess tomorrow. You were at the candidates a few months ago. I've already interviewed several people who've been to Toronto, but obviously you've been to so many top tournaments. How did this? What were your impressions of this one?
Well, there's. What do you want to?
There's so much.
Yeah. Well, obviously the finish was something. Yeah, that was pretty unique. I don't think to find a last round like that. You would have to go back quite a while. So that was pretty exciting. On the whole, I think candidates tournaments we've been spoiled. I think ever since London. What was it? 2013. When you had this race between Kramnik and Carlsen, and then all the next ones, they've all been tremendously exciting. So it's definitely one of my favorite tournaments. The candidates. There's always something. There's always a lot going on.
Yeah, and this is a point that I've hit on recently as well. You're going to Norway Chess, so perhaps you're more excited than I. But even a big event like that, it doesn't compare to the candidates for me. As we record on May 29th, with you taking off tomorrow, how does your feeling compare to heading off to Toronto?
Yeah, you're right. It's something entirely different. I think in chess the World Championship match and the candidates, those are the most exciting events, because there's so much at stake. In the candidates, there's just one place that counts. And if you play a wonderful tournament and you finish, let's say like London, when Kramnik played an absolutely brilliant tournament and he finishes second on tiebreak, and you just have nothing. So that's the drama, and I think in any sports competition, the drama is defined by how much is at stake, and in a tournament like Norway chess, I mean, there's a lot of stories there. Is Nakamura going to repeat his performance of last year, or is Magnus going to win again? There's many stories that you can think of, but they carry less weight. That's inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, the only one that really has people on the edge is Ding Okay, because this is the bellwether. I mean, because with the World Championship looming, we'd like to see him have a decent showing, which as we record, he's off to a decent start. But and then on the new in chess side, Dirk Jan, before we started recording, you mentioned you've been editing a biography of Paul Morphy by Charles Hertan. I know it's been highly anticipated in the Facebook Chessbook Collectors group. There's a lot of discussion of it. Could you reveal a few details about that project? It's rightly highly anticipated, but don't take me on my word because I'm a big Morphy fan, and I think it's great that Charles Hertan has written this book where he presents both the biography in chronological order, and then interspersed there are the games. They are in the story, which I think is a really good thing, and because it makes the story even more compelling, even if you don't play through all the games. Right.
Paul Morphy is one of those exceptional stories. I think if you look at chess history, let's say there's maybe 10 extremely big stories, and this is one of them.
For sure. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it helps with someone like Morphy in particular because it was so long ago that it can be difficult to know the chronology, and you've seen all these famous games, but they're not necessarily in order. Yeah. So it would certainly be nice to trace his development in a linear fashion and see the games and when they took place, because it was all fairly condensed with Morphy as well.
It was,
and of course there was so much going on in the world with the Civil War. So greatly looking forward to that. Are there any other new in chess books or other projects that you're particularly excited about right now, or is the Morphy project taking up most of your time?
Yeah, I have to finish that quickly now, and then I'm off to Norway, and then there's the podcast that we started, and there's a couple of book projects that I'm thinking about myself, but I better shut up and just get to work and do them.
I know that feeling.
Don't speak about something that is not there yet.
Yeah, well, the podcast, as I mentioned in the intro, it's amazing. I mean, to hear someone like Anish Giri discussing the candidates in real time, and then, as I mentioned to you in email, I mean, the last two as we record the last two with Atle Gran, who listeners who heard my interview with Simon Agdestein, this is the much anticipated English translation of the biography of Agdestein. I just find him fascinating, and Atle was speaks perfect English and extremely insightful. So I'm definitely going to read the book and reach out and try to do my own interview, but definitely recommend yours in the meantime. And obviously Matthew Sadler, legendary player and book reviewer, that was a delight to listen to. Yeah. How are you? I mean, obviously you've got great experience as an interviewer. Have there been any adjustments for doing it in podcast format, Dirk Jan?
Well, it is slightly different because I always script my interviews, and you do that here as well. And we don't record them live, but I approach them as if we do them live. So
that's what I do as well. Yeah. Minimal editing.
Yeah, and that is different. From interview. Well, it's slightly different. You have some more freedom when you're interviewing for a magazine. Then you can have pauses where you just speak about something else temporarily, whatever. But here it's you try to make it look as much like television as possible. Yeah, for sound.
Yeah. And with the something like an email interview, if you think of something later, often you can reach back out. So much of the sort of balancing the conversation is letting the guest speak, but then you might have a follow-up question that you want to remember that you think might be compelling, but then they go on to something else and you have another follow-up question, and it's hard to navigate that, but you guys are doing great. I'm greatly enjoying it. So listeners should make sure that they are subbed to the New in Chess podcast. And you said you guys are going to start doing videos at some point.
Yes, I think that's inevitable. That's what people tell me they want. So then, so then we do it.
That was the stark realization that I came to eventually as well.
So that's how it's going to be. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Dirk Jan, I mean, we still need to do another, for listeners who didn't hear my first interview with Dirk Jan, he told some great stories, but he has an absolute litany. And I greatly enjoyed reading Linares. You've just got so many stories, and we'll have to get you on again sometime to collect some more. But
that's a great thing.
But thank you for discussing this book with me.
Yeah, that's a great thing about chess, Ben, as we know that you can speak about it endlessly. That's and I don't know why that is, but it is the truth.
Yeah, it's shocking. Yeah, just how many pages you can fill and podcasts. Yeah, it never gets old. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dirk Jan. I think listeners, again, sub to the podcast and subscribe to New in Chess and all that. And we'll look forward to the Charles Hertain book and safe travels to Norway.
Thank you very much, Ben. And good luck with your podcast that I continue to enjoy and will continue to enjoy. So.